Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on an awesome viewer question, and that is to look at, is the narcissist really a narcissist, or are they just sort of going through a rebellion phase? And can we basically hang our head on this to help perhaps, feel more comfortable with sticking around? I think that's a great viewer question. So we're going to zoom into that. But before we get started, I just want to let people know that I'm going to post a link to join the new Peace and Harmony memberships. I've been receiving a flood of emails stating that people aren't able to find the join tab for some reason. I'm going to include the join link down below so you can join the memberships and receive even more content, tools, and resources and discussions and support for the topics that we really wrangle with here on the channel. So definitely we would love to have you join, so please check it out. So let's get moving on a little bit more in depth into, is this individual perhaps just going through a rebellion? Are they narcissistic? Are they just sort of learning about themselves? And when we talk about someone who is rebellious, there's basically someone who is going against another whom they are unhappy with or feel restricted or downcast by. Someone who might have had too strict parents. They might rebel, going against their authority, trying to learn who has authority. Don't tell me what to do. People who, the rebellious child who stays out too late, who has drinking problems, drug problems, that sort of thing. They're rebellion, they're going up against. There is a counterforce. There is something that they feel that they are trying to get a sense of significance and importance and autonomy, but it's usually through a negative channel, negative attention, and, going up against these other authority figures to kind of learn where they stand and, what they can get away with or not. A rebellion might also have a phase. And for some people who have a really deep sense of rebellion, then it might be a lifelong issue that they need to keep in check. But usually it's a phase that will have a shelf life. They can't continue to do it for a long period of time. They might not enjoy that. That's not their true nature, is to be a rebel. They might go through a phase. They might go through a stage. They might go through a stage of life where they have sort of this rebellious inclination and cause them to, maybe not keep their commitments, not keep their job, not keep their relationships, not keep their fidelity. And, rebellion, once again, depending on how a rebellious teenager, a rebellious adult, it might mean that they are trying to actually get something positive in correction, get positive for, what their outcome is. In other words, we hear about people who are advocating for human rights or positive climate change. They might rebel against certain systems, but it's done peacefully. This is important to acknowledge. Someone who is rebellious is really going to be different from someone who is narcissistic. Someone who is narcissistic is they have a pathological sense of self-importance. So it's not going to be just one person that they're rebelling against. There's going to be, it's just an ongoing chronic situation that's part of their personality construct. There is no counterforce to the force. It's who they're going, how their outlook on life at large. There is no counterforce. There is no sort of other that they are rebelling against. Even though they might seem rebellious, even though they might come off that way as the bad boy, the bad girl, or what have you, and for a lot of people that might be appealing and interesting and, reflective of who and how they feel within. However, that is usually going to wear itself out. It's and so if you're sort of banking or hoping that this might just be a rebellious period, you're going to tend to then worry about them and then feel that if you have enough discussions, give them corrective feedback, that they might be able to understand their ways or mellow out or tame down their sense of rebellion. This is not going to be the case with someone who is narcissistic. They don't want to be challenged. It doesn't, reduce itself over time. In fact, it tends to get more accentuated, more, more in depth. They present more of a challenge to others, and, they might get along with others who will tolerate or enable their narcissism. So, it's, if you are hoping that they're going to change, or worried about them and think that if you worry about them enough, that they'll eventually see that you are trying to direct them to a better perspective in relationships, that you can be their, their other side, where you're keeping, a vision for them. You're trying to help, rescue them. They're a fixer-upper sort of personality. This can be, feeling that you are then alleviating your tension through trying to work on them. And, that will really lead you astray, I feel, because if you're always worried about somebody, then you are sort of filling yourself up and identifying with being, their prophet, their savior, their rescuer. And you feel that, you are then identifying with a rescue role, which basically is not going to ultimately bring you happiness, because oftentimes the people who you want to rescue, or who you feel, if this person is just rebellious, then, oftentimes they don't want to be rescued. They will resent people who try to rescue them. You will get pushback. You'll get, tension. You will get discomfort. They don't want to be saved. They want to be the way that they are. And certainly they have the right to be that way. If this is their personality, if they're outspoken, they have extreme, opinions, they should, everybody should be a vegan. This is, or, whatever. It's just, that is their right to have and identify with this. And do you think that they're just going through a stage, you're basically putting yourself on the back burner, and you're becoming a sort of an external locus of control, and you're hoping that you will eventually, they'll eventually see the error of their ways, and then you will be their guiding light, and then they'll appreciate you forevermore. I mean, it becomes like a fairy tale. And, it's important to realize that the juicy stuff in life can be of that elevated moment, where you are my perfect match. No one is like you, where you really appreciate and then fall in love, but that is not about rebellion. That's not waiting for somebody to get through a stage. Sure, they might have a temporary stage, they're immature, they're trying to grow and develop their own thinking, but yet if it's fraught with situations that are hurtful to you, or you feel that you always have to keep them in check, you are signing up for an enabler stage, and you're only enabling yourself to stay stuck and blocked, and you're setting yourself up for disappointment. You're setting, the relationship up for potential failure rather than success. So you have to look at, perhaps is there a tension within that you need to correct and adjust, and rather than trying to save somebody from their rebellious ways. You might be their parent, so you might have to handle that. But if someone is sort of, narcissistic, it's a pathological sense of self-importance. So it might appear as rebellion, but it's really a different situation where, they're not. It's not something that they're trying to go up against, as you might think someone who is rebelling is. It's internally within them. That's their internal motivation. And like a great viewer question said, well, how can they be satisfied with hurting others? I mean, to them, they just consume relationships. It's a consumptive nature. And so it's just kind of like, and they'll go through the discard when, it no longer suits them. I mean, and so even if they're being insensitive, they've run the course with the relationship. So you can't really oftentimes ignite or feel that you're, you can make them love you, or that you can make them see the light, and that's the purpose of the relationship is, I can make you see the light and sort of force this enlightenment upon you and this change upon you. And if you're going through a rebellious stage, then you might need to look at that and what are you rebelling against, because oftentimes there is sort of this projection that people then feel, if in the question itself, you might really look at, perhaps, are you staying with this relationship that is unfulfilling to you is part of your own rebellion, or are you really are you really in this sort of approach and relationship that you need and want and can accept that, or are you staying stuck yourself in rebellion? That's a good question to ask yourself, because that can cause you to go through a loop. It can cause you to go through a stage that you need to grow through. That's your chapter. That's your stage. Why don't you direct the question also within, and to what degree am I still rebellion, and to what degree can I eliminate that, and then perhaps the relationship then might fall away, and you'll find that you're better enlivened and you feel more on course and more aligned with your own happiness through another type of relationship that isn't fraught with instability. The narcissist is, and it's not bashing here, but that's just who they are, and some instability in relationships might be a hallmark. Not might, it is. Same thing with the psychopath. I mean, it's just they're going to move through relationships in a way, in an instability or a changeable nature that is different from someone who is, who has their boundaries, who has their standards, who is not commitment-phobic, that is not, letting their body run the show. They have their own, intellect and passions in check, and they are comfortable with their own boundaries, and they see how coming together they can have a better life, together. We are better together than apart. And then, and then you make that commitment, you make that vow. So I encourage you to I think that's a great viewer question. And I think that's something that all viewers can look at. And even if you didn't have a rebellious streak, it might, especially someone who is psychopathic, I feel, they can create sort of an inner rebellion, and where you're sort of going up against your own best interests, and you're sort of taking a detour that's going to need a path correction. We talk about that, and then how you become at the crossroads, wimp junction. Am I going to wimp out and be downcast, melancholy, and sabotage and try to, rescue this? Or am I going to just swallow my pride, swallow my, my self-esteem, swallow my lesson, whatever it is that you need to get in you and ingest, and then move it forward? And it's much more pleasant, it's much more in depth. And then you might see that rebellion was somewhat superficial or not, not serving you. It's busting up at the seams. It's causing you more, to be afraid or live in the fray than you would like. So it's just to keep that in check, keep that awareness, keep that higher level of observation, and sort of do a body scan for yourself. To what degree are you agitating and rebelling yourself from maybe the truth? And, you might be rebelling because you have a sense of pride that's keeping you in the relationship, when it's not really in that in-depth level. It might be just too much fluff or superficial. And once again, that might be like a welcome relief, is to enter into some fluff. But if it's causing you issues where it's going against the very fabric of your commitments, the very fabric of your well-being and your autonomy and self-support and your health. I mean, there are just some key cylinders that you can look at. To what degree is, the rebel spirit or the rebel relationship, if that's what it is, and it's creating, a temporary, absorption or obsession that you can then move through with sort of looking and weighing things out, back and forth. And to what degree, how long do you want that stage of your life to be? I mean, you have to have some declarative purpose and be willing to understand sort of the outcomes. And did an impulsive relationship, are you trying to make an impulsive relationship the real thing when that's not really the fabric, or what is the true, mesh of the relationship? Or are you enmeshed, or are you trying to, get back some sort of crisis in your life, and are you trying to resolve a crisis through that rebellious relationship? Which becomes a big form of denial. It becomes a big head in the sand relationship, where it's, you might have lofty goals, but that are unrealistic. And that rebellion is usually something people grow out of. They satisfy themselves. They sow their oats. They live, outside of a good pattern. They sort of are in that lifestyle, and it'll eventually resolve itself, or they'll get into trouble and they say, I don't like living this way anymore. And then they sort of change their, that rebellious streak. And might just be a streak, but it's hard to try to make the real thing with someone who's just going through a streak. They're going to pass through it. They're going to move through it. And if you want, the real thing, and you're questioning the relationship, then the very aspect that you're questioning the longevity of it is to show that you have some true needs that aren't getting met. So you have to understand that there is something within you that you need to really open up your ears and open up your heart to yourself, and not try to push it away, deflect it, put it off, think that, I'm just, too sensitive. Really check it out, because those feelings are for you to take action through. And especially if it's a change that you have tabled for some time, then it's going to be harder to reach. You're going to pull an emotional muscle trying to, I'm going to deal with it now. You have to really take some time out and, walk, go for a walk and think about it. I do recommend things like your emotements. I've had a lot of viewers who have asked about that. An emotement is a tool where you can use this on your recovery date. Once a time, a recovery date is an hour or two that you set aside to really take out that sort of healed person. And you give that healed person a sense to breathe and interact and follow pursuits and check things out, go to places that you have wanted to go, that is sort of embracing that more healed side. So for a moment, if I were healed, this is how I would feel. If I'm going to let go of that wounded part, and I'm going to take myself out on a healthy adventure, and do these things that I know that I have been needing, but I have put off, because I haven't felt strong enough, secure enough. There's depression that has kept me back. There's, too much inner conflict that's kept me from, expanding and growing. I have been, so that's so that you then begin to identify with the healthy. You begin to identify with the whole. You begin to identify with the unwounded part of yourself, where you really tap in and you get a chance to live in that consciousness. So it has to be outside of your relationships of current. It needs to be a solitary date that you go on. In other words, where you're not around people who still have this referential of you as, the wounded, the victim, the this, the that, so you give yourself a chance to interact with a fresh slate in a fresh perspective. It's in allowing, it's all of a sudden you're snapping into I am healed mode. And this is, what it feels like. And I'm taking that part out of myself. Excuse me, here I'm entering into that. So, and then the emotement is an emotional appointment with yourself, where you are saying, one emotion, one sort of perspective, one feel and be experience that I have needed, but I have not allowed, is to, for example, be curious, or be happy, or feel that you are proactive. Curiosity is the main thing, or creativity, or humble, or in a moment of truth, or centered, or focused. So in a moment, or self-love, self-care, um, you know, expanding your knowledge in an area where, you're focusing on the spiritual, you're focusing on curiosity, you're focusing on self-love, you're focusing on slowing it down, you're focusing on speeding it up, you're focusing on joy, bliss, discovery, and you're using it, fearless, assertive appointments that with emotional states that you need to develop and get into, that you have been tabling, that you have been shuffling off, lost yourself in the shuffle, back burnering that experience. So maybe it's, I really need to develop my spirituality. I really need to get to a 12-step program. I really need to learn about, codependence. I really need to develop my curiosity about other countries. So you're developing that appointment with yourself with developing a specific emotion in time. So maybe it's confidence. I'm going to work on my confidence. I'm going to work on my serenity. I'm going to work on my security. I'm going to work on my happiness. I'm going to go out and I'm, going to smile. I'm going to, I have an appointment for joy. And just, if I were joyful, what would it feel like? And so to call forth these new emotional states, so you get exercised and you get strong at calling these states up. And so you get a sense of, being able to get into a certain assertiveness state, or a curiosity state, or a bliss state, or a joy state. And then you plug these into your calendar because you need and want to. And so it's very much, and it gives you a strength and ability to manage and handle and understand your own emotions, what they feel like for you. So if you have a lot of social anxiety, these are great. Rather than anxiety, I'm going to just feel serenity. I'm going to feel self-acceptance. I'm going to feel accepted. I'm going to have a belonging, a moment with myself. So these feel states and be states that that you need to develop, but you've allowed, too much of your regular routine to prevent you from that. One thing that is important for you to check out when it comes through, understanding yourself, and perhaps to understand, is to stop rebelling against the changes that you need to make. And so, for myself, I've already begun to get and do the things that I have made a proclamation that I've wanted to do, whether it's contacting somebody, whether it's changing up something. I've already begun to do the do. So it's important, to do the do. What is the do that you need to do? I mean, what is it that you have really been, a feel state, a be state, that you have really been sort of putting down the flusher, that you have, that you need to do, but you've been putting off, shelving, I've got plenty of time, all these things, and that's usually a really major excuse, is that people think, I have enough, I'll do more of this tomorrow. Even though you'll find that you're only doing the very bare minimum, and you're not excelling. You're not sort of getting there. It's okay to take your time, to take your sweet time. But, if the pace of your recovery is not fast enough, or you're still suffering, you're still unhappy, then the elopement date can be a real great tool for you to use. And to keep, your feeling states in check, so that you don't backslide. You don't stay in the valley moments. You're not staying in those repressed or oppressed levels. You're really feeling that you're rising up. And rising up and changing, it doesn't have to be a lot of hard work, something I'm going to fail at. If you're doing these and you're making the change, then you are not failing. You are getting a handle. You are getting a grip. You are getting a grasp. And just to get a little bit more feel of this, for a lot of people, they're afraid that life won't be as fun. I might not, this, that. I might be too boring. Check out all of those sort of backlash feelings as well when you talk about setting up your elopement dates. What is, also just sort of the thoughts that are trying to kind of rebel against your own positive change. And so, and how does that look, and get that sort of set up so you can see and feel these new moments, these new feelings that you know that you've needed to indulge in. Rather, maybe it's having a focus, maybe it's taking things out of focus and being a little bit more open-minded, less rigid. So, one of your moments might just to be open-minded, to just get a new perspective, look around, rather than seeing things from the basement, see things from the 30th floor. Go and change your perspective. Go and take a tour of a high-rise building. Go to a town 100 miles away and have a lunch. Go and, do these things. It's meant to be, create a new sort of reservoir for you to tap into, and a new sort of active, checking in and navigation of those. So you're no longer deterred or, taken off road by your emotions. It's your buddy, Peace and Harmony, here today. I hope that the videos do help. Please join the membership. Please share, and please give me some comment and feedback with how you feel about understanding this topic within. Have a beautiful day.